I'm standing right in front of the famous lighthouse from The Fog from 1980. This is obviously where Stevie had her little radio station. A lot of stuff went down at this lighthouse in the movie, but this movie, directed by John Carpenter, music by John Carpenter, cinematography from Dean Cundy from the original Halloween, The Thing, and so many other movies, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Adrienne Barbeau, Tom Atkins from Halloween 3. I mean, holy shit, how can this movie not be a classic? So, was this movie a disappointment, or is this one of the best horror movies of the early 80s? Welcome on in, everybody. Today I'll be reviewing the supernatural horror film The Fog, which was released in 1980. This movie was filmed in 1979, mainly in Northern California and Hollywood, actually pretty close to Bodega Bay, where Hitchcock's The Birds was filmed. Story has it that inspiration for this movie came from when Carpenter and writer and producer of the original Halloween movie, Deborah Hill, were actually in England at Stonehenge, and they saw this fog kind of over in the bank that kind of almost looked like it was glowing in a way. And they just kept asking each other, what is inside of that fog? All right, and before we get into my review of The Fog from 1980, I'm gonna kind of give you guys a brief synopsis of the plot of the movie. So the story is about a strange glowing fog that drifts over a small coastal town in Northern California, bringing with it deadly ghosts on a mission for revenge for a shipwreck that happened 100 years ago. All right, but first I wanna point out that this movie is really old, so there will be some spoilers in this review. But first, let's start off with some things I think this movie did well. So first, I want to point out the intro to this movie. I think this whole campfire setting where the kind of ghost story is being told to the kids is just a really good way to kind of set the underlying tone and the story for what we're about to see for the next 90 minutes of this movie. Another positive for me are the characters in this movie, which are really good. I want to start off by talking about Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Elizabeth. She's kind of this drifter, hitchhiker who ends up hitchhiking and getting picked up by Tom Atkins on her way to another place, but she ends up sleeping with him and kind of liking him a little bit more than she probably expected to, which unfortunately for her ends up getting her all tied up in this entire mess, and the town's about to pay up for something that they did a long time ago, and her character kind of just gets twisted up in the whole thing.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Are you weird?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am weird.
You are weird.
Yes.
You're weird, thank God.
Another character that I want to point out who actually has a pretty big role in this movie is actually Jamie Lee Curtis's mom. This is the second movie they were in together. You probably recognize her from Halloween H2O, but her character does a pretty good job throughout the movie. Just a second ago, I mentioned Tom Atkins, who actually plays a character named Nick Castle in this movie, which is actually the actor's name of the original guy who played Michael Myers in the original Halloween from 1978. But Tom Atkins just does a fantastic job in this movie. Really like him as an actor. He actually plays this character very similar to a role he'll play later on in Halloween 3. He's kind of this cool, calm, collected character, kind of a suave character who gets the ladies, but also no matter what's going on in the story, he kind of always has it together and helps to kind of figure out what to do at the end. So Tom Atkins, just a really, really good job in his role in this movie. You've also got Adrienne Barbeau, who plays this character named Stevie, who recently purchased this local radio station in town, and she plays this kind of the nighttime DJ at the radio station, and she narrates a lot of this movie, but actually a little fun fact, she was married to John Carpenter in real life at the time that they filmed this movie. I think they divorced just a few years later in 1984. And if there weren't enough familiar faces or names in this movie, you've also got Nancy Loomis, who's not only the name of Billy Loomis's mom from the Scream franchise, but she also played Annie Brackett in the original Halloween movie. But overall, the cast and the characters in this movie are just really, really good. I could go on and on about more of the cast members, but they're just really, really good in this movie. There's not a single false note throughout the entire movie. All right, so I'm right in front of Stevie's house. You can see right there. And of course, you remember towards the end of the movie, you've got that scene where the fog's kind of rolling in from the back of the house, moving in as her little boy's in the house, being babysat by the grandma. Just a really intense scene, but this is pretty damn cool. I'm right in front of the house. You can see the water out there. But a lot has changed. Looks like the roof has changed, I believe, from the movie. But very, very cool. Another positive that I have to mention is just the atmosphere of this movie is fantastic. We've got kind of this small, sleepy coastal town. We've got Adrienne Barbeau's voice, her smooth voice over the radio throughout the movie. And overall, the atmosphere in this movie is just so good and feels so much like a typical Carpenter movie would. Also, the music in this movie is just so damn good throughout the entire movie. It's typical Carpenter music that you would expect. It's got his vibe to it for sure. Almost in a way, the music kind of feels a little bit 90s, but then all of a sudden, like the synth tune will kind of hit over the piano part of the music. But overall, the music in this movie is really, really good, and it's definitely a soundtrack that I'll listen to on my own. Another positive that I want to mention is just the acting in this movie, which is really, really good. Obviously, it's an early 80s movie, so it has a kind of a certain vibe to the acting in this movie, but I really enjoy it. There's also several long dialogue scenes with no cuts at all that I really enjoyed, and I was like, damn, that's kind of impressive. But just the overall acting in this movie, very, very solid. There's also some really good jump scares in this movie. For example, like when Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Atkins characters are kind of below deck in his friend's boat, and they're kind of just going through this long dialogue scene. Tom Atkins is telling a story, and the movie kind of mesmerizes you to kind of listen closely and intently to his story, and then boom, all of a sudden this dead body pops out. It's just an example of several very, very good jump scares throughout the movie. I've also got to talk about this concept around the fog. It's brilliant to me because just this idea that you can barely see anything and anything could creep out of the fog at any time is pretty damn scary. It's like your house, your world, your surroundings are not even there anymore. Now you're in their world and they can creep out of the shadows, creep out of the fog anytime they want and come and get you. All right, now you can see I'm right outside of this church, but there's something cool I want to show you in just a second. Now we'll walk on this way a little bit, run on up here, and right up here, you'll recognize this. Let me see if I can get a good little shot here, but you'll recognize this cross from the movie. Right here, this is where they drive up towards the church towards the end of the movie, but pretty cool. I also love the entire backstory of this town. You've kind of got this sleepy little coastal town that doesn't seem like it's up to anything, but it's actually got like a very dark underbelly to it. Basically how essentially the town got their first influx of money because the preacher and 5 others murdered a wealthy, diseased man and some others by getting their boat to crash. Really just watching the town kind of piece together these little clues to figure out why all these weird things are going on is great to me, especially as we're kind of building towards that last little party at the end to kind of celebrate the history of this town, when little do they know the history of this town is actually a lot darker than they might think. Speaking of just kind of the story building, I really enjoyed the build of the story throughout the movie. You essentially know right away on this 100th anniversary, the people from the boat are coming back for revenge. But it doesn't just happen in an instant. Weird things start happening, then more weird things start happening, and then people start disappearing. And then in the third act of the movie just gets cranked up to 100.
Someone listen to me! My son is trapped! 887 White Beach Lane, my son is trapped by the fog! Andy, get out of the house! Run!
And I absolutely love the setting for this entire movie. You've got this kind of quiet beach town that's very remote and just adds a really nice feel to the movie. It kind of reminds me of the setting of Jaws, of course, but it also kind of reminds me of the setting for the factory in Halloween 3. But overall, I grew up in Northern California, so the setting for this movie really hits home to me. I mean, holy shit, how fucking cool is the lighthouse location for the radio station? Like, look at this shot. That's incredible. You've also got essentially the entire movie narrated by Stevie or Adrienne Barbeau's kind of smooth, sultry voice. It just shows you back then how much a little small town relied on kind of their local radio station and stuff like that. Oh, and by the way, I wasn't alive in 1980, but were all female radio DJs like basically a sex hotline kind of a voice? Is that kind of how it was? Oh, also a little fun fact, the reason why you hear jazz music on the radio in this movie is because apparently the royalties for jazz music are a lot cheaper than the royalties for rock music. So that's why you hear jazz music in this movie. This is Drake's Beach in Inverness, California, just a short drive from the lighthouse. This is the beach where Andy finds the gold coin that turns into the piece of driftwood. Also earlier, I talked about kind of the atmosphere of the movie, but just the overall creepiness of this movie is really, really damn good and classic Carpenter. It's kind of that whole theater of the mind thing. In this movie, the creep factor is very, very good. I also love that they don't show too much of the killer until the very end of the movie. It's kind of that classic Carpenter approach where he wants you to use kind of the space between your head, your imagination to kind of think of what these things really do look like throughout the movie, and that really does kind of mess with you. Also, little fun fact, the main ghost, Blake, was actually played by Rob Bottin, who spearheaded all of the practical effects in The Thing 2 years later. Also, you should know, anytime somebody's babysitting in a Carpenter movie, shit's about to go down. But that entire sequence with the grandma and the little boy in the house as the fog is kind of rolling in and taking over the house is pretty damn intense, and the entire time you're kind of wondering, are they actually going to kill both of them? And spoiler, there won't be any milk and warm cookies for this little fella, unfortunately, but that entire scene was pretty damn intense, and I'd imagine especially back in the 80s. This is where Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis come to a stop as they notice the fog's coming right at them up the street. They then reverse and escape and make their way to the church. The next thing I want to mention is probably a negative for a lot of people, but I really enjoy the pacing of this movie. It's definitely kind of a slow burn. Like, you've got moments in the movie where you're watching somebody make coffee and drink coffee and kind of think for a little bit. You've got the moment towards the beginning of the movie where the guy is kind of just sweeping the convenience store, and then weird stuff starts to happen in the store slowly. But overall, I just think the pacing of this movie fits very, very well into kind of the atmosphere and overall feel of this movie. I also just love movies that are paced like this, that just kind of like take their time to build the tension with the music and just the overall atmosphere of the scene. I know a lot of people, it's not really their cup of tea. They prefer more of the quick cuts and a quick ADHD kind of a vibe to a movie. But I really, really enjoy this, and that could be because I grew up on movies with similar pacing to this. And lastly, I want to mention I really, really enjoyed the ending to this movie. You've kind of got the tension that's really, really building to this peak. You've got Stevie up on top of the roof of the lighthouse with really nowhere to go. You've got the other people barricaded inside of the church, and then ultimately they use the golden cross to kind of make these things disappear. Then as soon as you think it's over, nope, bitch, we didn't get victim number 6 yet, and then Father Malone gets hacked by the sword with some great sound effects. Just overall, I really enjoy that ending. Next, I'm going to briefly talk about something in the movie that's mixed to me, which is the kills in this movie. Now, the kills are definitely not bad. They're definitely effective, but they're not overall great to me. Obviously, they're a little bit more subdued than kills we get to see later on in the 80s in franchises like Friday the 13th and stuff like that. But the kills in this movie, like I said, definitely not bad. They are very effective for this movie, but none of them are really all that great. So I'm going to put this as more of a mixed for me. Next, I want to talk about some negatives in the movie. And the first thing I'm going to mention is just Stevie staying on the air instead of, going after her son or even making sure her son is okay. First of all, she's kind of new to this town, right? So why does she even really care that much? Secondly, there's no way you're going to catch me on the air still instead of ditching this shit to go and help my son. I'm sorry, just tell them to avoid the fog on the radio and then just get the hell out of there. Plus, it's a little bit iffy why she's so confident that there's something dangerous in the fog anyways. She never witnessed it really. Really, she saw a piece of wood do something weird and then kind of get wet and catch on fire. And then also she heard somebody scream over the phone. So, why is she so confident that there's so much danger in the fog? Another negative for me, and admittedly, this is a bit of a nitpick, and this would have made the ending way more boring, but why would you stop at the church when you're trying to avoid the fog? Why wouldn't you just keep going east or north or whatever direction is in the opposite direction of the way that the fog is going? Why would you stop at this church, especially when the fog is right on your tail? Well, I guess maybe they stopped to try to once and for all defeat this thing before it kills more people. I guess that could have been the reason. But still, when I watched that part of the movie, I was like, why are you just not driving? And here are my final thoughts. I really like this movie. It's got a lot of replayability to me and almost coziness to me. The mood and the atmosphere in this movie is fantastic. The setting for this movie is so damn good. The cast is really, really good. And overall, it's just a really damn good Carpenter movie. But there you go. That is my review of The Fog from 1980. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, be on the lookout for new videos which come out every single Friday. But in the meantime, I'm Matt McFarland. And thanks for watching. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already done so. Make sure you also turn on those notifications so you don't miss any future videos at all. All of my social media links will be down below in the description if you want to go and follow me over there. But anyways, everybody, I will see you in the next video.